And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. According to the witness of Genesis, light came before there anything else existed. And even according to the theory of the Big Bang, that which is exploded forth was in fact light, energy manifest as light. In John 1, verses 4 through 5, John testified that in the Word was life, and the life was the light of mankind. And the light shines on in the darkness, but the darkness has not mastered it. Scientists have discovered how light is a wave and a particle. It is wave-particle duality. One of the things that we figured out with quantum mechanics that was hard for us to understand for a long time. Light conveys and is energy. The higher the frequency, the higher the energy. And the sun is a great example of this. It is a huge ball of nuclear fusion, and the energy expended in that constant nuclear reaction going on bursts forth as light. Light that we can see, and light that we can feel and experience the radiation and the heat and the warmth from it. That energy from the sun as light is what allows life to exist. It heats up our world. It allows for photosynthesis. All life is based upon it. And thus, why? The Word and God is life and light. Because from light comes life. Without light, there is no life. How do we recognize that there is light? How do we know what light is? Well, it all comes from that which allows us to translate our world, our best of our five senses, and that is the sense of sight. In Matthew chapter 6, verses 20 through 23, Jesus talks about the way the eye works. The eye is the lamp of the body. If then your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is diseased, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Now, Jesus is trying to make a conversation about the kind of things that you would take in with your eye and how it can reflect out the whatever is going on inside, whether light, good and healthy, or darkness, that which is ugly, unhealthy, diseased, and leads to corruption and death. But the idea that the eye is a lamp of the body is very important because our eye is a very sophisticated instrument. It receives light in through the pupil. The iris, that area that has the color of your eye, the brown or blue or green or hazel, will either open up the iris, the pupil wider when there is less light, or when there's more light, it will make it smaller. That light will reflect off a lens, which will then allow the retina in the back of the eye to take that light and to translate that light into an electrical signal. And that electrical signal is then conveyed to the brain by means of the optic nerve. It's taken science a long time to figure out that much. And then in the brain is where we really see. We say we see with our eyes, but our eyes are the kind of the light receptors and light translators. The reason that we look like we see with our eyes is because obviously the light's coming in from our eyes, but it's our brain that's actually making sense of it all, because it takes the electrical signals from the optic nerve and it works to create the image, the construction of the image that we are constantly seeing as sight, as what we are seeing. In 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 7, Paul says that we walk by faith, not by sight. And we understand that he's talking there in terms of the fact that we put our confidence in God in Christ, and we will follow him even when things around us that we see may not make it seem like that would be the best thing for us to do. But there's a kernel of truth in there that maybe even Paul himself was not aware of. That what we think we see is a construction of the brain and is not a 100% objective expression of everything that is in the world around us. We've been conditioned to believe that, and it's understandable why we believe that. People for a long time just assumed that what they saw with their eyes is what was going on around them. They had no reason to think otherwise. But now we have reason to better understand how God has made us, how God has made our sense of sight. And it can become very troubling for us when we are accustomed to the idea that, well, whatever is going on that is in my visual range, well, that's what I'm seeing, that's what's going on. When we're used to that being a 100% accurate reflection, to hear that, no, our brain is very active in constructing it may be very disorienting and very uncomfortable. Throughout, we need to remember that of all the senses we have, our sight is our best one, both in terms of the quality of what it was able to represent, as well as its relation to our fellow animals all around us. Our sight is better than our hearing, our smelling, our tasting, and our touching. And yet, we only see a little bit at any given point in 20/20 vision. We're going to now have an example. If you can see the thumbnail there, the thumbnail that you see is 1% of your visual field. At any given moment, that is the only amount of your environment that you are seeing in 20/20 vision. Now that may seem counterintuitive. Now wait a second. I can see all kinds of things right now and it all seems very clear. How can I only be seeing it 1% at a time? Well, part of it is that your eye is making multiple moves per second. And so it's picking up little bits of 1% every fraction of a second. And what's going on is your brain is taking that in with kind of the more blurred elements all around and constructs the image of what's going on based upon those little glimmers of 1%. Now you might wonder, well, why wouldn't God have just made us so that we are seeing at 100% at 20/20? Well, scientists have calculated our brain would have to be multiple times bigger to be able to maintain the processing speed, so to speak, and processing ability to be able to render everything in 20/20 vision. Now, isn't it a marvel? Isn't it amazing? And we see the power of God and the economy of God in the way that He's designed things, that at any given moment, our brain is receiving constant signals from the retina and receiving the light in from the eye, converted and making sense of it all, making sense out of movement, making sense out of all the different things going on based on these little 1% fragments coming in from all over the visual field. At the same time, we're also able to have the brain process what may be hearing, what it may be sensing through touch or through smell or taste, through focusing on some kind of activity that it's involved in, and it's all happening at the same time. It's really a marvel. It's really powerful. Like David, we do well to praise God for how well we have been wonderfully made in Psalm 139. But yet we come back to the fact that it is taking shortcuts, and not even just shortcuts. There's also many ways in which the brain is consciously or subconsciously modifying what you're seeing at any given time because of all kinds of issues that come up with our ability to see. Do you remember the dress? Those of us of a certain age remember in 2015 how the internet lost its mind over the dress. What was the dress? Well, a woman was trying to find a dress to wear for a wedding and took a picture of this dress and sent it to a friend, and the friend thought it was a completely different set of colors than the woman who had the dress in her possession. And then that image circulated online, and there was a huge argument, if you remember. Those who thought the dress was black and blue, those who thought it was white and gold. And in fact, it was very, very, very contentious. A lot of people were very insistent, no, it is black and blue, no, it is white and gold. And there was not a lot of flexibility there. And in fact, there may be a lot of relational damage that took place between friends and others because of their very sharp opinions. Again, going back to just how much confidence we have in what we're seeing. Well, what's going on? Why could people look at the dress in see different sets of colors? Scientists believe it's because of what they call chromatic adaptation. That your brain will correct for color based upon different light conditions. And the idea is that when you're in indoor lighting and there's more of a yellow hue in the light, the brain corrects what it sees and makes the rendering it more black and blue. However, conditioned by more outdoor light, where you have more of a blue tint, your brain will kind of convert that to being more white and gold. The fact of the matter was that the issue comes from the picture. The picture of the dress was a low-quality picture and not the greatest light. In truth, the dress is blue and black. That's what it was. But you can understand where, with the way the lighting was, why that was such a difficulty. But it shows us the fact that our brain is doing subtle changes in color to make out things, to make sense of things, because it's adapting based upon the various color schemes going on, the various amount of lighting going on. And this can happen in many different ways. And in fact, it's not even just when it comes to things like that. There are conditions sometimes somebody's had a stroke or somebody's had an attack on their optic nerve, as with multiple sclerosis or other conditions, where a person can have a part of their vision that goes blurry or becomes entirely blind, kind of having a blind spot in their vision. They can see around the blind spot, but the blind spot itself, they cannot make out anything. And there have been tests done with people who've had this condition where they've had very small images of various tools that are placed in their field of vision where their blind spot is. And they're asked to see what that tool is. They are not able to see what it is. But yet, when they are then asked to choose between two options, which tool it was, there's a statistically significant percentage of time they choose the correct tool. Which is even there showing that even if you don't see everything exactly, things that you don't think you see all the time, your brain is seeing things, and maybe it's not coming to our conscious level, but it's working in our brain somewhere that we somehow remember it, even though we don't actively remember perceiving it. And these are just some of the hints, some of the times where, the working of the brain kind of becomes opaque to us a little bit, where the curtain is drawn a little bit on how our brain is taking all the inputs it's receiving and making its minor corrections so that we can see more effectively according to what the brain is thinking. But what it shows us, and this is incredibly important for our consideration and for us to really chew on, is that our vision is not just what's going on around us 100%. It is constructed by our brain. Our brain is what is constructing this image by the inputs it's receiving and some of the data it already has or subconsciously knows to make sense of. And if you think about it, it's really powerful and potent, right? That's something that we just have developed. No one taught us how to do that. Again, it really shows the great power of God's creation in how our eye is able to turn that light into electrical signals that our brain's then able to code to actually be able to see as clearly and as vividly as we are able to. But it's also a reminder, we don't see as well as we think we see. In John chapter 9, Jesus heals a man born blind, and as a result of all that takes place, he says, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that those who do not see may gain their sight, and the ones who see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard this and asked him, "We are not blind too, are we?" Jesus replied, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now because you claim that you see, your guilt remains." It's such a counterintuitive thing that how can Jesus make people who can see blind, but those who are blind see? And of course we can see in terms of the guy was physically blind. Jesus healed him so he could physically see. But there is a spiritual dimension of that going on too, right? And it goes to how so many times in the way that we talk about how we understand things, that we are very much dependent upon that sight metaphor. There's blind faith if we don't have evidence for something, right? That we see that this is the case. A lot of times we use sight imagery to talk about, they just don't see it, or they need to see it, or they're motivated not to see it, right? All of that may involve some actual objects which can be seen, but sometimes it's just the way that we talk about these type of things. There's a conundrum of our sight that is inherent from this passage and from what we have seen, right? And that conundrum is that we see, but what are we really seeing? The fact that what we see is constructed is a reminder that we don't necessarily see everything we're supposed to see. And the fact that we're only seeing little details at a time mean that there are times that we miss details. Maybe you've heard about the big gorilla suit experiment. People were told to focus on and find out like how many times somebody dribbled the ball. And a guy walked through wearing a gorilla suit. And when the person was asked about it, who was watching it, didn't even see it. They didn't see it because they were so focused on one thing that all this other stuff in the visual field was just neglected. Our brains have to do that because if we were trying to process everything in our visual field at any given moment, it would overwhelm our brain. Overwhelm to just think about it, right? But what that means is we can miss things. We can miss things, and that is not just true about our sight, it's about how we perceive the world around us. There's the idea that we get, the new car fallacy, right? Where you get a new car, new maker, new model, and all of a sudden you start seeing it everywhere. Now, sometimes it may be more popular, but a lot of times what's going on is that you didn't have a reason to notice them before. Now that you have a reason to notice them, now they become much more apparent to you. There's always that many out there. You're just now seeing it. This is where confirmation bias comes in. And that's kind of what Jesus is getting at. A lot of people are motivated very strongly to not see certain things, right? Upton Sinclair said that it's very hard to get somebody to see something when their salary depends on them not seeing it. And a lot of people have convinced themselves that there are certain things just aren't the way they are. And when you convince yourself it's not the way it is, you're not going to see it. You're not going to perceive it. As Mark Twain said, it's not what we don't know that gets you. It's what you're just sure ain't so. There's this wisdom that's coming from how many times this happens. And this is where Jesus is talking about that sight and blindness. That a lot of times we think that we're seeing, but we're actually not seeing as well as we think we should. We're missing out on some details. We're overemphasizing other details. Now, everybody will believe in confirmation bias about the other side, right? Those other people, that's why they're deluded, they're deceived. They don't understand because they aren't seeing. That's why Jesus had something about taking the beam out of our own eye before we look at the speck on our brother's eye. Because we also have our own forms of confirmation bias. There are some things we want to see. There are some things we don't want to see. And part of that's just in the way we're naturally conditioned. In order to try to make sense of the world, we have a framework, and we don't want to try to figure out how to fit in pieces of that framework that don't really fit very well, and so we're very tempted to reject them. But in the process, we may therefore hold fast to delusions and prove ourselves to be blind, and our guilt would remain. In John chapter 20, Jesus said to Thomas, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are the people who have not seen and yet have believed." Of course, this is from doubting Thomas. Jesus is actually not chastising Thomas there. He has appeared to the disciples for the very point to show that he has been raised, so they can be witnesses of this event and say, we saw it. We were given this visual evidence that this took place. Jesus is making a message for others. Blessed are those who have not seen and who yet believe. Because downstream from this whole idea of seeing is the fact that in our world today, our materialist world, scientifically materialist world, it absolutely is. You need to see it to believe it. A lot of people want to say the only things that exist are things that are perceptible. And you can say a lot of things about the ancients, but they were not so foolish or arrogant to believe that all that existed was what they could perceive with their senses. We have learned from all kinds of research that all kinds of other creatures can see, hear, smell, taste, touch things differently, in many ways better than us in certain domains, in certain respects. There's a lot more out there than what we can perceive. And it goes back to that willful blindness that comes when we are convinced that all that exists is what we can perceive. We need to be careful about that. Doesn't justify and commend blind faith. Again, even that metaphor, that is blind faith, that there's nothing behind it. On the other hand, there's a reason why Paul said that we must walk by faith, not by sight. If all that we ever depend on is what is in the perceptible, we are going to miss a lot about the way that this creation happens to work. 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 6, Paul said, "For God, who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' is the one who shined in our hearts to give us the light of the glorious knowledge of God in the face of Christ." And in 1 John chapter 1, verses 5 through 7, when John wants to tell us the gospel, he says, "God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. If we say we have fellowship with him, yet keep walking in the darkness, we are lying and not practicing the truth. But if we walk in the light as he himself is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus' Son cleanses us from all sin." So that idea of physical sight, we've seen, is a really powerful source domain for all kinds of metaphors about sight and blindness. And darkness and light is also a very fertile field in the scriptures for a source domain to explain things the way that it works, our relationship with God. As we've said, God is light. Light is the means by which all things can exist. And really, that's how we see anything, right? All the reason that we can see is because there's light. If there were pure darkness, our eyes would be completely useless to us. There'd be nothing for us to see. You need light to be able to see. Light needs to bounce off things and then hit your pupil through to your retina for you to see anything. And it's only the reflection of that light, right? And that's so powerful, because just like through light we're able to see the world around us, the idea is through God, who is the light. When we look to him and his reflection, we can understand the way everything works. Everything works the way it works because of God. Just like we see light through its reflection, we see everything through the reflection of God. That we cannot see God, but we can understand all things because there is God. The ways of God are right and good and holy and lead to eternity. So we're able to see and recognize that we need to learn how to become more slightly skeptical of what we think we see. But we also should not blindly trust in ourselves or that what we've been taught. We're encouraged instead to entrust ourselves to God in his ways. The God who provides that light and is light, who gives life abundantly. That God's vision is true vision, and he sees all things and he sees them well. We, on our own, are like in the darkness. We see dimly, and even at best, and are easily motivated to justify ourselves and what we do. That's why we have the powerful testimony of 1 John 1, 5-7. God is light, in him is no darkness, that we need to walk in the light as he is in the light, to follow the ways of God in Christ, no longer going the ways of darkness, stumbling contrary to him, to be able to see everything reflected through him and in him, that we can find that life in him and to avoid that darkness. Thus we see sight, something we take for granted almost, don't even think twice about it, and everything we see, the majesty of it, but also its limitations, so that we can truly glorify and honor God throughout our lives. We're glad you joined us today. If you have any questions or comments on anything we've said about sight, we'd love to hear about it in the comments. Please continue our conversation. I'm Ethan with the Venice Church of Christ. We're disciples making disciples in Los Angeles. We'd love to be of encouragement to you. If we can, please reach out to us on VeniceChurchofChrist.org. You can also find us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube. We're also now on Threads. And may the Lord bless and keep you until we'll meet again.